This morning we have a video that gives you really good context for who she is, and there's no better intro than that, so I'm going to share that now.
My name's Christina Weisner.
Hi there, and I'm Matt Keene.
And this is the River Cube Project. So in May of 2019, we'll be sailing the River Cube down the entirety of the Neuse River, approximately 275 miles from source to ocean.
The River Cube Project is an inquiry-driven quest to co-create a response to the question,
what is a river?
If we ask 1,000 different people what a river is, we're going to get 1,000 different answers. So what does it mean to them? What's their relationship to the river?
The River Cube is a sculpture made of aerial film that I found at a surplus facility. It's film of an entire river system taken sometime within the 1970s of an unknown river. So taking this sculpture of this river system down an actual river, we're exploring this question of what is a river, and the sculpture functions as a holding space for all of the ideas and conversations that we have. We'll be collecting all kinds of diverse data to build an archive for the River Cube Project that will eventually lead to a collection which will be exhibited at a museum in North Carolina.
Awesome. Can you guys join me in welcoming Christina to the stage? Woo!
Thank you. Hello. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful October morning. I know that you all have the sun shining directly into your eyes by all the sunglasses that I see, but I do have several images that I'm going to be showing, so feel free to come closer. I noticed earlier that if you're sitting sort of right in front of one of the screens, it's easier to see. And maybe we can post the images later if you can't see them at all. Okay, so my name's Christina Weisner, and I am a sculptor. So this word flow. For many of us, it immediately conjures up imagery of water, right? So water flowing from a faucet, the ebb and flow of the tides, water flowing down a river. So for me, this is a very exciting subject matter because, as you all just heard, I just recently, this past May, paddled 275 miles from source to ocean on the Neuse River here in North Carolina. And in preparing for this talk, I thought about what we can learn from water, in particular rivers, especially as it relates to our approach in our creative work and how we can access this state of flow, or also in sports terms known as getting into the zone. So I came up with 4 rules that have continuously helped me as an artist that I wanted to share with you today. Rule number 1, just jump in. Just jump in. A river is an ever-shifting excavated form carved by water, often formed over millennia. Its waters traverse ancient rocks from the basement of time and accumulate behind dams of the modern epoch before flowing onward to the global ocean. All land is a part of a watershed or river basin and is shaped by the water which flows over it and through it. Rivers are complex systems. So how can one possibly understand something as complex as a river? You simply have to jump into it and, quite literally, no pun intended, go with the flow. If you want to experience the flow of a river, you don't necessarily need to think about the outcome or where it is going to lead. You don't always have to think about whether or not it's a good idea. You simply have to jump in and immerse yourself in it, unless it's like a Class 5 rapid, in which case I would think twice about that. If you immerse yourself in the process of your work, rather than purely concentrating on the end result, it's much easier to find a state of flow. And certainly, as artist Chuck Close has said, do not wait around for inspiration. Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. If you wait around for the clouds to part and a bolt of lightning to strike you in the brain, you're not going to make an awful lot of work. All of the best ideas come out of the process itself. So if you're sitting around trying to dream up a great art idea, you might be waiting a really, really, really long time. And I know it's hard to see here, but I found these circular forms that you might be able to vaguely see on the screen here at a surplus facility one stop away from being dumped in a landfill. And I was initially attracted to their semi-spherical, minimalistic form, but had absolutely no idea what they were as I went ahead and loaded them into my car. Through a Google search, I came to learn that they are protective cases for ocean bottom seismometers. And I was initially I thought about the environment for which these objects were made, what societal desires gave rise to them, and what change in those desires resulted in their obsolescence and my finding them at a surplus facility. There's a sticker on one of the forms that had a phone number on it. And so I was actually able to track down the scientist that worked with these forms, and he turned out to be one of the leading scientists in the field of seismology and had also put one of the first seismometers on the moon. So he was kind of a rock star. But in speaking with this individual, I was able to learn where the seismometers had been deployed, how they worked, as well as how to rig them so that they could once again function in a sculptural installation. So here, if you can see it, can you all hear me okay, by the way? Okay, great. The resulting sculpture, if you can see it, consists of 9 glass hemispheres which sit atop plexiglass cubes on which a mallet-rigged system is built to strike the spheres when activated by real-time seismic activity around the world based on live data provided by the U.S. Geological Survey's website. One of the hemispheres houses a working seismometer that records and displays on a screen the movements caused by footsteps of people in the gallery viewing the work. So ideally, the sculpture encourages the viewer to consider the macro and micro processes through which we interact with the physical world on a daily basis. The resonating sound made by the mallets hitting the glass alters the space, both physically and psychologically, as the sculpture creates a composition of tones that correlate to the movements of the earth. In my process as an artist, I typically begin with a single found object. Usually these are unique objects, often scientific instruments about which I initially know very, very, very little, as well as places with geological, scientific, and cultural significance, for example, a river or a meteorite impact crater. I have to just jump into my projects. I have no specific idea what the end result will be because I often know so little about the object or the place in the beginning. So it's kind of easy for me to find a state of flow because I have no fixed expectation of the end result at all. When I finish a project, I sometimes almost become like a semi-expert in my own right, like major emphasis on the semi. But I appreciate that through the process of making, I learn about the world. But when I start, I begin with a complete beginner's mind. And if at the beginning I can imagine the outcome of a work of art, in my opinion, it might not be worth making. Think about it. If nothing is known, absolutely anything is possible. When we don't know exactly what we're looking for, we have to fully immerse ourselves in the process and pay extra close attention to our subject matter. So if you just jump into a project and don't quite yet know what you're doing, even better in my opinion. If we take our cue from scientists, we know that in science we must always begin by asking questions, not by giving answers. Science is the opposite of knowledge. Science is curiosity, and I ask a lot of questions in my work. I'm driven by curiosity, and I actually take great comfort in the fact that the scientists who work with the objects I find or who share their knowledge on their research with me don't always know what they're looking for when they begin new research. Albert Einstein said it best when he said, if we knew what we were doing, it wouldn't be called re-search. By casting the widest, there we go. By casting the widest net, I explore the widest possible range of relationships to the objects with which I choose to work. exploring everything from their formal properties, their history, the environment for which they were made, and the people who invented and worked with them before I encountered them. So for example, in this image, if again you can see it, I'm interested in the similarity of the form between the instrument called a 493 V-fin, which is the yellow triangular form in the center, and the Tiktaalik, which is on the bottom left, your left. The two forms have a mere 375 million-year-old time difference, yet they have the same form and function for maneuvering through the water. My work ultimately explores the relationships between objects, humans, and the natural environment. The way in which I navigate through this process is precisely what drives me to make the work, an encounter with the unknown. The definition of exploration is the action of traveling through or in an unfamiliar area in order to learn about it. In the case of the River Cube project, it began as a fluke encounter with a giant canister of film, also on its way to the landfill, containing about 75 feet of aerial film taken sometime within the 1970s. It eventually, over the course of several years, turned into an actual 3-week traverse of an entire river system, in this case the Neuse, with an artist, myself. I can't tell if that's playing or not. Now it's playing. With an artist, myself, a social, natural, and systems scientist, Matt Keene, and we had 4 amazing interns from the fields of science and design, and of course, naturally, a giant cube covered with the found aerial film functioning as a sculpture and experimental space. Collecting everything from qualitative and quantitative scientific data to anecdotal stories of the residents who reside along the Neuse River, this inquiry-driven quest to find a response, or rather, responses, to the question, what is a river, changed us, mentally and physically in ways we couldn't have possibly imagined if we hadn't literally jumped in and traveled through it to learn about it. And not just one section of it. It was important for us to understand the full complexity of the river holistically from start to finish. No matter how much we prepared for the traverse through research or physical training, you just can't comprehend something fully until you experience and embody it. So, what keeps us from jumping in on a project and finding our flow, getting into the zone? I would say that for a lot of us, it's the fear of failure. So rule number 2, be willing to fail. Rivers are great at not failing. If they find one route is blocked, they simply carve a new route. How many times have you started something and shortly thereafter stopped because either the voice in your head or someone else said, this is a stupid idea or this is a waste of time? Well, I'm here to remind you that some of the most influential ideas and discoveries in human history have either been considered failures and rejected at first or just completely dismissed. Take Copernicus, for example. He published his unprecedented theory of a universe with the sun at the center, heliocentrism, in 1543. And not only was his book banned, his successor, Galileo, was convicted of heresy charges in 1633 for teaching his theory. That's very tough to see. 19th century Impressionist painters were prohibited from participating in the most important annual event in the art world of the time, the 1863 Salon de Paris. After looking at Impression Sunrise by Claude Monet, art critic Louis Leroy wrote, "Impression, wallpaper in its embryonic state is more finished." WD-40. Personal favorite of mine. I spray it on my bike chain every morning. I live in the Outer Banks and I ride my bike on the beach. I don't know what I would do without it. The name comes from the fact that the formula represents the 40th attempt to create a degreaser and rust protection solvent. Can you imagine if the lab had given up after 39 tries? That would have been devastating to me. If these individuals had said this is a stupid idea and hadn't risked potential failure, our history would be different. Perhaps as said best by Eric Kessel's, author of Failed It, if no one is arching an eyebrow while slowly, condescendingly asking, why on earth are you doing this? If your ideas aren't routinely mocked when shared with those who follow the rules, you're probably doing it wrong. In 2012, I decided to apply for a year-long Fulbright grant to Germany for sculpture and installation art. My proposal, I wanted to make the point here that flow and failure are mutually inclusive. My proposal, in short, was to make site-specific sculptures about the Reese meteorite impact crater, one of only few empirically proven impact craters on our planet. Upon sharing my ideas and aspirations with some people very close to me, whom I respect deeply, I was told that nobody would take such an idea seriously, for the subject matter was far too obscure, and to come up with something else. Nevertheless, I drafted my proposal on the Reese Crater project and submitted it. Several months later, I received the rejection letter. So I applied again the following year, and this time I received an acceptance letter. Upon my arrival in Germany, I met with leading geologists, astrophysicists, and experts in the field of planetary impact research at the Natural History Museum in Berlin and elsewhere in the country. These individuals helped me to understand the scientific aspects of the asteroid that created the crater and the unique environment of the crater itself. I spent a lot of time at first looking through microscopes and exploring rock quarries in the crater with geologists. And I actually lived in the crater for 6 months. So I'm not sure if you can see the image, but there's an aerial shot of the impact crater. It's 26 kilometers wide. And within the crater, there's a town called Nördlingen, which is an old medieval town with a beautifully, perfectly intact medieval town wall. It's in Bavaria in southern Germany. If anybody ever gets a chance to go there, it's absolutely fascinating and beautiful. The sculptures resulting from the grant were shown in 2 exhibitions, one in Nördlingen and one in Berlin. The exhibitions consisted of a body of artworks based on the specific site and effects of the Reese crater that merged the discourses of art, science, history, and community. If I had feared failure, I would have missed out on 2 of the richest experiences I've had in my working career. I wouldn't have spent a year making site-specific work about a meteorite impact crater, and I certainly would not have attempted to paddle or tow a sculpture down 275 miles of a river. There's power in failure. When you're willing to fail, you broaden the amount of things you're willing to achieve. But what if something actually fails? Right? What if a ceramic sculpture explodes while being fired in the kiln, ink gets spilled all over a drawing? Train yourself that when mistakes do happen, when things do fail, you recognize the potentiality in that failure. Perhaps a ceramic sculpture broken into 100 pieces glued back together is actually more interesting than the original non-exploded version. Perhaps the spilled ink added just the touch of mystery to an otherwise stable, boring drawing. When a student in one of my art classes spills something or drops a clay sculpture on the floor, I say, great, that's so exciting. What are you going to do now that you've freed yourself from the perfection you were trying to achieve? Why not bask in the glory of imperfection? If we're not willing to risk failure, then we're probably playing it safe. And often playing it safe leads to a lot of bland monotony. So perhaps failure is actually just rejecting the safe and expected in favor of the exciting and the unknown. The objects I use in my artworks are failures in a sense. The fact that I find these objects at surplus facilities, dumpsters, or recycling centers speak to the inevitable failure of all objects as falling short and incapable of providing concrete meaning or functionality due to their impermanence, our impermanence, and the exponential speed with which technology is considered out of date. Objects and materials travel through space and time and are eventually discarded, lose utility, and break down. But how they do this is a form of disclosure, revealing insight to their specific properties and functions. The failure of the object is what provides the beauty in the work. The slippage of concrete meaning, the propensity for meaning to move across the once discarded objects I utilize in my sculptures. So perhaps next time you jump into a project, you invite failure with open arms because it might just be a new route to success. Which leads me to rule number 3, be in the present moment. Rivers exist in the perpetual present moment. Leonardo da Vinci, in the 15th century, wrote that in rivers, the water that you touch is the last of what has passed and the first of that which comes. So with present time. In a similar vein, Hermann Hesse and Siddhartha wrote, have you also learned that secret from the river, that there's no such thing as time, that the river is everywhere at the same time, at the source, at the mouth, at the waterfall, at the ferry, at the current, in the ocean, in the mountains, everywhere, and that the present only exists for it, not the shadow of the past, nor the shadow of the future. When you're in a state of flow, or in the zone working away on a project, have you ever noticed that your awareness of time momentarily dissolves? This is precisely where you want to be. To the ego, the present moment hardly exists, only the past and the future are considered important. When the ego seems to be concerned with the present, it reduces the present to a means to an end that always lies in the mind-projected future. So, to function in the present moment, you have to put your ego aside. That pesky part of you responsible for saying, don't jump in, that's a stupid idea, it could fail. It would follow then that flow and being in the present moment are also mutually inclusive. You can't find one without the other. Now, personally, I have found that there's nothing that catapults you into the present moment quite like using your body. Having crossed the Alps twice on my bicycle and now traversed the entirety of a river system, there's something powerful about using your body to understand something. When you propel yourself through a landscape by using only the power of your own strength, you gain a deep understanding for that place, an understanding that can't be read, can't be measured, and perhaps can't be put into words. Now, woo, I can't even see that. Okay. I happen to be particularly fond of long-distance sports, but a simple walk would do the trick. Plenty of famous writers have used walking as a way to organize their thoughts and get into a working flow. In paddling a river, you're not only using your own body's strength, but you're also immersing yourself into the ever-present flow and tempo of the river. In his collection of essays, River Days by Jeff Renicky, he writes, there's no rushing a river. When you go there, you go at the pace of the water, and that pace ties you into a flow that is older than life on this planet. Acceptance of that pace, even for a day, changes us and reminds us of other rhythms beyond the sound of our own heartbeats. From the RiverCube project's launch on the Eno River, the headwaters of the Neuse, to our arrival in Ocracoke, we were reminded daily of the rhythms and complexities of the Neuse River, beyond the sound of our own heartbeats. And let me tell you, there's nothing like waking up and only having one task to achieve, paddling 20 to 30 miles down a river. I have never, ever in my life felt more present. And interestingly, when we weren't listening to the sound of birds or our own paddles gliding through the water, we would find ourselves in absolutely electrifying conversations with ideas just flowing out of us. Testament that being in the present moment can really lead to a state of flow or a flow of ideas. Because we didn't know what we were looking for, as mentioned earlier, we paid close attention to our surroundings, which required us to function in the present moment. We kept a life list, a record of every animal we saw, collected weather, temperature, water data for later analysis. We deployed a fish finder receiver from the boat to listen for acoustically tagged fish, contributing data to important scientific fish tracking efforts. We collected interviews from literally anyone who would speak with us. We were interested to learn about people's values, their stories and memories of the river, and how those intersected with our values and experiences. And finally, in considering the present moment, we also considered this unique time in our planet's history, a time in which humanity is exerting its influence on all of Earth's ecosystems. We are seeing shifting seas, changes in climate, and the disappearance of innumerable species. many scientists believe that a reframing of current approaches to conservation initiatives to address this unique time in history is urgently needed. This is precisely the line of work in which my collaborator on the River Cube project, Dr. Matt Keene, is involved. After a dozen years of working as a social scientist in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Matt created the Silwood Group, a transdisciplinary team that works to create new approaches to conservation, sustainability initiatives, and the environmental evaluation, with an environmental evaluation that matches the complexity of the system being evaluated. So this brings me to my fourth and final rule: stay fluid. Rivers are both contained by boundaries and are responsible for forging new ones. A lot of my work develops from the exchange of ideas when working with people outside of my own discipline. Collaborations with such people force me to think outside of my own preconceived notions, often outside of the boundaries I've inadvertently drawn for myself as an artist. Through such exchanges, I often forge new, unexpected, but welcomed work. The aim of the River Cube project was to bring together art and science, not as competing or contrasting, but as interdependent and co-evolving perspectives to understand a complex system such as the Neuse River, giving due attention specifically to the human ecological relationships found in such a system. The point of the River Cube project was not to solve any problems, for example, water pollution, or to present solutions, but rather to look at how two systems of thinking, in this case, art and science, can change the conversation, change how we ask questions, and perhaps the way we approach a subject matter in order to learn about it, i.e. a river, a sculpture, a conservation plan. By working across disciplines, taking a holistic versus a reductionistic approach, which requires genuine engagement with multiple perspectives, we hopefully broaden our own viewpoints of the world and are perhaps better equipped to deal with something like, for example, the complexity of climate change. So, what the heck are we doing now with all of the information we gathered? We are currently working to unpack and synthesize all the data, interviews, drawings, pictures, sound recordings, with the goal of creating several works of art, perhaps even some site-specific works along the banks of the Neuse River, as well as eventually an art exhibit. So finally, people often ask, what was the craziest thing that you saw on the river? And this one still blows my own mind, but we're pretty sure that in a wilderness section of the Neuse River that we saw a golden panther swim across the river ahead of us and then jump out and run into the woods. And it was just the most bizarre experience because technically, I Googled it all, the East Coast mountain lion has gone extinct. Golden panthers don't exist in this area, but at first I thought it was a golden retriever, and I thought, what the heck is a golden retriever doing out here in the middle of nowhere? And when it got out, I was like, that was a giant cat that looked like a lion. And so for a moment, my brain was like, golden retriever, lion. But sure enough, when we got to the next boat ramp, I asked one of the fishermen, I was like, are there big cats around these areas? And sure enough, there was lore and mythology that somebody knew somebody else that had seen a panther, whether it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and they even had a name for them, pander cats. So for example, that's one of the works that my colleague Matt Keene and I are developing, this idea of myth versus reality, and how on Earth can a species exist without being absolutely confirmed by scientists, but they're out there. So that was incredibly interesting, I have to say. So in closing, I would like to encourage you all in your practice or professions to just jump in and go with the flow. Turn down that critical, self-judging ego and try something that feels a little edgy. Stay fluid and follow it through. The worst thing that could happen is that you could fail. And perhaps that's actually the beginning of something really exciting and unexpected. Thank you.
Thank you. We can take some questions. Anyone have questions for Christina? I can bring you the microphone. Oh.
So as someone who is not at all scientific and hardly creative really, it's really interesting to me that you seem to be both. Is that what kind of inspired what your professional path has been?
Yes and no. I feel like in a way I was sort of a late bloomer in my interest in science. And so maybe in high school I missed out on learning all the things that I'm actually interested in, and so I'm catching up on that now. But I think that there's an interesting relationship between science and art in that both are sort of looking for the underlying existence of reality. And for me, like I said in my talk, I'm interested in sort of learning about the world through the objects that I find. And I happen to find a lot of scientific instruments. And I also, I am not an expert in science and programming and engineering. And so I like the fact that I make work that I'm incapable of making on my own. I have to work with other people. And I really enjoy that pulls me out of my own headspace. And often, like I said, I'm surprised by the work that I make myself. And for me, that kind of makes it worth making.
That's awesome.
Christina, could you comment on the idea that artists, as members of a community, as people who are making art and making things and making places, can influence larger decisions that we're making as a species?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that goes towards sort of the work that Matt is doing in that the world is an incredibly complex system, and how do we do anything with a sort of reductionist approach and thinking about fields as isolated disciplines. I think, and it's not a new thing in the 21st century to work across disciplines, but I think that the more we do it, the more we can actually address the complex problems that we're currently facing. But also, maybe if it's not about problems, just in the way that we share experiences through music, performance, art, storytelling. I think that artists have a huge responsibility, right? We are the cultural markers, the buoys out there that help us navigate our way.
Thank you. Right over here. Thanks so much. I'm fascinated by how when we come to these talks, there's often that thing that each of us have in the back of our mind that we're feeling the urge to do, and we just need a little kick from someone like you. I know I can think of what mine is, and so I'm curious to put you on the spot. Is there something that you need the push to jump into? What's your next creative or scientific endeavor that kind of scares the crap out of you?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, with my work, I don't know. That's the great thing, is sort of being ignorant to it. Ignorance is bliss is definitely a mantra that I sort of stand by. So with my work, it's easy because I'm gravitated towards a place or an object, and I purposely go in as a non-expert. So there's this level of humility that allows me so much freedom to not have to know anything and be like, all right, people, I don't know anything about this place. Tell me about it. And again, that pulls me out of, the limits of what is inside my own brain. But I will say that something that terrifies me is public speaking. So for me, I have a rule, and maybe at some point it will get me in trouble, but it's been pretty good so far. But I just say yes to everything, and then I deal with it later. Yeah. Don't think too much before you get into it, no matter what. Yeah.
Any more questions? We're all spread out. Happy to take one more. Well, we're really grateful to you. I know that you put a lot of preparation into this talk, so thank you so much. Can you guys give Christina a hand?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions about the other projects that we're working on, I am here and open to any questions afterwards. So thank you.